Well, I'd like to welcome Dr. Emeran Mayer and Anu Simh to the Resilient Biome podcast. I'm really excited to have not one, but two very well-known, world-renowned guests with us this morning. I would like to, first of all, hello. Yeah, welcome.
Hi, Dr. Rich.
Hi.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, so much. So, Dr. Emeran Mayer, world-renowned gastroenterologist, neuroscientist, pioneer in understanding the brain-gut microbiome connection. His research has shaped how clinicians and consumers understand the intricate conversation between the mind and the digestive system. And Dr. Mayer and Anu met and are doing a workshop together. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Anu is a midlife transition guide specializing in symptoms that fall through the cracks of conventional care. Known for her clear language, practical frameworks, and compassion-first approach, Anu helps women understand what their bodies are truly trying to do. So I know both of you, especially in the clinician end of things, just want to help people. Certainly, that has always been your passion. So that's what we want to do on our little slice of the world today. So thank you again for being here.
I mean, just an introductory thing from my side. I've been fortunate to meet Anu at a integrative medicine meeting or integrative psychiatry meeting. I was really impressed by our conversation and by her track record in providing practical, actionable help to patients with a variety of chronic symptoms. I wouldn't say diseases, but chronic symptoms, particularly more common in midlife in women. So from that early start, we've kind of worked on this together. And, from my personal view, I can contribute obviously some of the science to this, and Anu is contributing a lot of practical experience. I think it's a pretty unique product that doesn't really exist at the moment. And my feeling is that a lot of patients will benefit from this.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Yeah. So, Dr. Mayer, I would imagine anyone that tunes into a podcast that's about the microbiome probably knows a little bit about the gut-brain connection. But for listeners new to your work, could you please just give us whatever overview you'd like to share?
Yeah, it is surprising to me. I mean, obviously, I've been working in a bubble of a lot of people that are quite familiar with brain-gut interactions. But it's always surprising to me if you go outside this bubble, how few people really know something significant about it. They either have misconceptions. Obviously, a lot of information nowadays is promoted on social media and not by, scientific communications. So, yeah, I would say that if you sort of expanded this to the US population, maybe 20% have heard about it. I mean, it's kind of surprising that even microbiome, that term, is not familiar to everybody. We think it's just like we talk about it every day to multiple people. Um, but I'm always surprised to be reminded of this, that there's people that do not know what the microbiome is. And they're far from understanding. For them, it's like an exotic idea that these something that you have inside of you, which is always in the past being considered harmful to us, that this would communicate with your brain and there would be a benefit out of this for your health. So I think that's the way I see it.
Yeah, yeah, and isn't it funny? Whatever we're passionate about, we assume everybody else understands at our level. So that's a great introduction. Thank you. When I think of the gut-brain connection, I think immediately of Alzheimer's because my own mother was diagnosed at age 49, which, back then nobody knew about Alzheimer's, certainly not the gut-brain connection. So, I have not tested myself, but a question I'd have and probably relevant to a lot of people, even if I did have one or more of the APOE4 genes, can you talk about how much risk reduction, epigenetically, I might have just from emphasizing gut health and all the other lifestyle factors that you guys talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I let Anu comment on this as well, but from my view, So I'm a strong believer in systems biology that, our complex disorders and diseases are not caused by one thing, certainly not just by genetics, but by multiple influences interacting on our body. And so, yeah, I mean, they have been in the past, like peptic ulcer disease, you block one mechanism and the ulcer disappears or doesn't even show up. Those diseases are no longer around. We're pretty much taking care of most of those simplistic. Um, I think what we're dealing now with is chronic diseases that all point towards a breakdown of interactions within the system. So I've been involved in the NIH Alzheimer Consortium, listened to these discussions of some of the smartest people in this field on a biweekly basis. It's a very complex disorder. The brain-gut connection is an important part of it, not all of it. What percentage that plays overall in the risk of developing Alzheimer disease, I think that's hard to say. I think in the future we'll use AI to estimate these relative risks. We throw everything into the system and then let AI to figure out, what are the relative vulnerabilities of a person. I would say because it's one thing, the brain gut, I'd like to call it the brain gut microbiome system. It's a complex interaction. The big advantage of it is it may not be the only factor that determines if you develop it or not. The big advantage is that we can access it fairly easily with a variety of things, with diet, with exercise, with meditation. The biggest advantage, I think, of the concept of the brain-gut microbiome system is it's accessible, and you don't need expensive medications. Is there a guarantee that if you do all the right things and but you have the risk genes, you may still develop it? I think there's no guarantee, but I think you certainly will decrease the risk. I think we can probably say that.
Mm-hmm. I love your use of the word systems there. And I would imagine what you just said, you could broadly apply to a metabolic disease and heart disease and everything else, right? Just all related.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, speaking of that, Anu, your organization is called Nine Arms of Wellness. So talk about multiple symptoms. Just wondering what that framework captures that a single lens approach might miss.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. My mantra, Rich, has always been that optimal health is our birthright. What I began to notice early on was that access to optimal health often dependent on your zip code. Organic food, supplements, biohacks, testing, you name it. They were available to certain people and not to everybody. And that never really sat well with me. Over time, I think what I realized that the body does not work through isolated fixes. Just like Dr. Mayer said, it operates as an integrated system with the gut, brain, immune, endocrine networks constantly communicating. So health became less about just symptoms and more about that overall regulatory state of the system. I began to see that one of the most powerful tools for regulation were also the most universal ones. So food is information for the microbes. Hydration helps with cellular respiration, or sleep restores that brain-gut signaling. Breath is a direct link to the nervous system, and mindfulness changes how the brain perceives threat. So, and none of these required these, expensive supplements or elite access. I work with clients across the spectrum, right? People who can afford all of these tools, and fantastic, we can dig deeper. But I also have that person who works two jobs and who saved up money to come work with me. And I wanted something, a framework that worked for everybody. And I needed to know that it worked for everybody. And that's where that really forced me to step away from these siloed approaches and really think in systems. And that's the reason I was just so excited about working with Dr. Mayer, because he truly believes that. And his research shows that every step of the way. And so when you start looking at your body through that systems biology lens, the most powerful upstream levers are these universal tools available to us, through diet, through hydration, through sleep, through mindfulness. And so optimal health stopped becoming this exclusive thing. And my framework was able to support everybody. And so that was important to me. So that's pretty much how I started the 9 Hours of Wellness.
That's a great reason to do that. I live in rural Wisconsin, and 25 years ago, I'm not sure if it's still the case, we had the world's sorry, no, largest organic food distributor in North America,
Yeah.
Organic Valley. Maybe you've heard of them, but uh,
Oh yeah,
oh
yeah.
yeah, they're just down the road. So we're pretty crunchy around here, and you would think everyone walking around is perfectly healthy, but even with that benefit, I
Yeah.
don't see it. But I love your emphasis on optimal health. That's a great phrase.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Mayer, I read that you have been specifically working on the gut-brain emphasis for about 4 decades. So about 38 years before I learned of it. So
Mhm.
maybe this is too broad of a question, but can you narrow down the biggest breakthrough in that time or a couple of breakthroughs?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on these interactions of that. This has fascinated me and has actually been one of the main motivating reasons to go to medical school, that I was always interested, and I can tell you why that is. I don't have any symptoms, and so it's not driven by my own problems.
Mhm.
Um, but this has always fascinated me, and initially it was primarily focused on pain as a symptom of these interactions. Um, it's always amazed me how reductionistic concepts about pain have been, that there's gonna be this still today, this one receptor in the gut that causes and if you block this receptor, then you get rid of your pain. I mean, this it's amazing how persistent that has been. And so I would say the first 2 decades of my career, I've really focused on a particular group of disorders, what we call now today disorders of brain-gut interactions, with IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, being at the center. The most common one that you see is a gastroenterologist. And so we were fortunate to get NIH funding. I mean, pretty much throughout my career on this topic. It was not accepted by my peers. It was not accepted by a lot of patients. The minute you put brain into the term, they felt that you're blaming it on psychological factors. Um, and so it took a while before, I mean, it took almost 40 years before, like the main authority in this space of irritable bowel syndrome, the Rome Foundation, accepted the term disorders of brain-gut interactions. The struggle to add the brain to that definition was tremendous. It took decades and meetings, and um, so this has really been, I would say, a major breakthrough that this has happened. It's always, I mean, there's a lot of people that have contributed to this paradigm shift, but I think that our center at UCLA, which has been focused on this concept from early on, and has published on it, despite resistance, gets a big part of the credit for this change. And that change has opened up all kinds of novel therapeutic approaches, from um, like all the behavioral approaches, which this concept of neurogastroenterology, that it's now not just looked at gastroenterology. Most gastroenterologists have really no connection to this concept. They go into the specialty because of the endoscopy and the lucrative aspect of doing procedures, but not to understand, brain-gut microbiome interactions. And but I've seen an ongoing, it's almost like a revolution in this field. When we look back, I could see this in 20 years at the history of this field. People will say, okay, so this has been a struggle early on, barking up the wrong tree for decades. And now we really, for the first time, have a concept and have new approaches, have acceptance by the patients. And so that's a good thing. For me, later in my career, about 10, 15 years ago, the whole microbiome science exploded in the field. And initially, I was skeptical of this because we thought we had enough plausible explanations for that just brain-gut interactions would explain the symptoms. But I think the microbiome has added a important dimension to this. So now it's expanded from the brain and the gut to the brain-gut microbiome system. And then because the microbiome is adjacent by a few microns to the immune system, the gut-based immune system, it draws the immune system into it. And for me, it's been amazing how it's drawn over time, just within a very short period of time, all the major regulatory systems of our body into one unifying framework. And not everybody, scientists or physicians, are aware of this or recognize it, but I think it will become the dominant way of looking at chronic disease. There's absolutely no question.
So, am I hearing you right that when you first started this pursuit, was the microbiome almost a black box? You just didn't have the tools to look into it fully?
It wasn't even on the radar. I
Ah,
mean, that happened about, I would say now 15 years ago with the NIH Microbiome Initiative. And then by a few investigators, particularly, people like John Cryan in Ireland, published his first papers um, on microbiome signaling to the brain, which I looked at very skeptical at the beginning, but I think that has been confirmed, at least in animals, as a causative factor. Um, so it's a relatively recent thing, like our early studies were heavily focused, I would say, on the brain, the mind, stress, um, and neuroscience. Really, it happened all at the brain level. But then once the microbial field, became mainstream, it was obvious that there is this communication between these invisible, vast numbers of microbes with our brain without us even knowing it. And also in a bidirectional way that our brain influences these microbes, talks to them all the time. Our microbes know about our emotions, and whatever goes on in the gut, our brain knows that as well. So, everybody's informed all the time. Um, I think what happens with chronic disease is this beautiful communication of the system has been compromised. Um, it's been a mismatch of environmental factors, starting with diet, lifestyle, lack of exercise, a mismatch with the beautiful design of these systems, which in evolution have encountered all kinds of things and have adapted to it. But what's been happening the last 100 years, increasingly, that was not foreseen by evolution. So we got now, a mismatch of all these systems. And that I think were the symptoms come from that a large percentage of patients complain about and don't get a satisfactory answer.
I
Part of
think
what I hear you
thanks a
say.
bit.
Oh, please go ahead.
No, I think I so 100% agree with what Dr. Mayer is saying, because I think of it as like a family heirloom, our microbial diversity we pass on to the next generation. And when I hear all these studies that are kind of saying how we're losing species, every step, it's scary, that something that is so important to our very being is under threat. And a lot of it can be, addressed through these things like diet and lifestyle. So that's, I think, the biggest thing that I want to pass on to people like that. And you were right, we live in this bubble and we think that everybody has heard about the microbiome. But when I was writing the book, I heard that 2 out of 3 Americans have no idea what the microbiome is. And I want to reach out to that person, that Uber driver who asked me, what the heck is a microbiome? I mean, he has every right to have the same access to this information as the person who is a practitioner or someone who has the access to all this type of information. So I think with our workshop too, that's my biggest goal, that we are able to address this and really simplify the system and say, listen, you do all of this, weight is metabolic issue is no longer a problem because you're able to look at it from a systems perspective rather than, oh, I'm going to take a medication for this, or I'm going to be on a restricted diet. And what Dr. Mayer said about genetics and having that gene, I can't remember, Rich, but I think it was some Hollywood star who had one of these genes, and all of a sudden I was getting so many calls like, what do I do about this? So of course, genetically you can't do anything about it, but epigenetics and nutrigenomics, you could change and shift the conversation a little bit. So yes, and there's hope for me from my perspective. Yeah.
Well said. I think that was Chris Hemsworth, 2 copies of
Yes, that's it.
APOE4.
Yeah.
It freaked him out. You should wake up when you know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the workshop, so that's coming up on January 17th. So if you could both just share about your goals and ideas for that.
Yeah, let me start with this. I think, the goals are obviously the people that will sign up for this workshop, and we have had a lot of interest just for the pre-workshop webinar where we talk about what we plan to do in the workshop. There's been a surprising, interest that we've seen people signed up for the webinar. I think one is to improve awareness that people understand in a larger sense. So we don't want to force any change on people. I think it will start with awareness, with a reset, and ultimately with, I would say, personalized guidance, what people can do. Obviously, in a workshop with multiple participants, you can't do it really personalized because we're not talking to each individual separately. But I think people will recognize themselves in our presentations, that, well, I belong in that category, I belong in that, so that's good for me. I've seen this, for example, with my first book, that the main referral pattern has become that people come with the book to my office and say, I'm patient so and so on page so and so in your book, and I would like to know more what I can do. So I think if that workshop does that, the people recognize themselves in it, and realize that they can, that they're not doomed with their symptoms, but they can actually do something personalized. I think and that's really where, a news team comes in with these practical recommendations.
Nanu.
Yeah, but yes, and I think it's more like with the workshop, with the webinar, what we hope to show people is there's a sequence, there's a framework, doing things, putting too much effort at the wrong time can also pose a problem. So we hope that when they start seeing themselves in all of the examples that we give through that framework, they realize that, okay, I'm doing a lot, but maybe I'm doing things in the wrong sequence. So when your body is, when your system is not stable, when when it's dysregulated, you're adding and you're bombarding your system with more protocols and supplements. Your body goes into shock, right? It's just going through a lot. So all of that is based on Dr. Mayer's science. He and I put together this framework to simplify things for people because science has to be accessible to everybody. And this is our way of showing that someone in midlife, men and women, can have access to a framework that will take them to their ultimate goals of a health, optimal health.
Yeah, give you a couple of examples. So, for example, somebody might get the idea from, from social media influencers who has these symptoms of, fatigue, lack of energy. They should go on a specific diet, like on the keto diet, and they ignore everything else. That they think if I can shock, it's like an electroshock to your system. Um, it's it's extremely unlikely that that will have a lasting benefit. People may get a placebo effect from this and initially feel better, but it's not what we recommend. The same thing with taking one supplement or with taking a probiotic with 15 strains and billions of colony forming units. I mean, that's also like a shock treatment to the system. This is not how the body works. The body never in nature would never consume that amount of external microbes in with one pop of a capsule. So and companies compete with putting more and more billions into their capsules. I mean, it completely misses the boat. If you look at other medical or healing disciplines like the Asian disciplines, it's always mimicking nature with using multiple components in low doses that have no side effects, but that interact in a positive way. I think that this is how I see what a news team will recommend to patients. It's not that that nuclear bomb approach, but it's the I would say Ayurvedic or traditional Chinese medicine approach philosophy, not all the details, but the philosophy.
Yeah, the underlying Eastern medicine philosophy is work with nature, not against it. Like in Ayurveda, for example, we look at food, which is called ahara, and food is not just what you put into your mouth. It is what you feel, what you perceive, that perception. And if we are in a stress state all the time, it doesn't matter if you have the fanciest food from Whole Foods and organic and top of it's not going to work because you're not going to your gut is going to take a beating. Your gut is sending all of these messages to the brain and vice versa, and so that's going to be under attack. So looking at it from a systems perspective and really kind of going with let's make stability of the system number one thing before we move on to fixing your circadian rhythm, just having rhythm in your sleep and your eating, your meal timings, all of that matters. But if you try to push too much at the wrong time, the body goes into overload. So throughout the workshop, that is pretty much what we talk about is step one, step two, step three, step four. And finally, you build tolerance when you don't respond to stress as a threat. Your body is able to handle it. But it's not possible when you have no stability in the system. So.
Mm-hmm. A couple of words that we've already talked about that pop in my head. Systematic, sequencing, and slow. And then you just said stable. That brings about stability. That seems to cover it pretty well. Yeah. Well, I'm even more excited to be a part of that in a couple of days. I see one of the goals of working with your clients is to help them regain a healthy weight. And I see that is one of the topics in the workshop. And I could see some of both your fingerprints on the topics listed there. But maybe you could talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, no, you know.
Yeah, I actually no longer treat weight as an outcome of underlying. I treat weight more as an outcome of underlying regulation. I, I'll readily admit that wasn't always the case. A client used to come to me struggling with, I would focus on diet and, maybe exercise. But the more I started looking into microbial signaling, and I realized that when that diet is supporting that gut-brain signaling, appetite control, glycemic stability, and energy regulation, all of that often improve, without just making this into a very mind-boggling thing. So that has helped me a lot in how I handle weight loss and, more importantly, weight management. Because people can lose weight on a restrictive diet. They do a juice fast or something like that. They lose 10, 15 pounds, but it always comes back. And that is where I connect that microbiome knowledge to weight management. And it's really worked phenomenally well for me because first it's education, that's empowerment. The minute they understand those polyphenols and the flavonoids that I've been asking them to take is really helping them, helping the body recognize that it doesn't have to hold on to past memories of obesity. It's like a game changer. I think it was Erin Ellenau's study that completely changed my outlook on metabolic signaling. It was a study on rodents, but then he confidently said that, wow, I see this with humans as well. I think he was working with flavonoids at the time, and I started using that in my practice just to see what kind of, as an experiment to goal with certain clients. And I had one client who had lost over 40, 50 pounds by himself. And then he came to me just feeling really terrible that he had gained all of that back. So we started using this approach. Now it's over 6 years and he hasn't gained the weight back. So I believe that it's multifaceted and regulation is the key.
Yeah, commenting on this, so I mean, clearly obesity and overweight is clearly a systems disease. The fact that there's a resistance to maintain or to go back to a different set point is a good example for a system that has feedback loops built into it.
Yeah.
You can force it by decreasing dietary intake or changing diet. You can force it temporarily, but but the wiring of the system basically doesn't change, or if you don't attack this at the same time. And yeah, so there's all these examples. There's the yo-yo effect that people lose weight relatively easily, and then they not only regain it, but they overshoot their
Yeah.
baseline weight. There's also now this big this big impact of these weight loss drugs, GLP-1 agonists. And it's the same thing, like they're very effective for people to lose weight, but then when you stop them, the weight comes back, and again, you have this yo-yo effect. And so I think the goal of an intervention like our workshop is to to change this intrinsic connectivity of that network that regulates like food craving and that you don't have to worry about it, that your system becomes resilient and stable at a new set point. I think that's kind of key thing. And that you won't reach
Yeah.
even with our most powerful medications. I mean, I think it's remarkable. So in my career, the first time that I see this, that a medication can actually make people lose significant amounts of weight, but it has not changed the basic underlying problem, unless the entire US population starts going on these drugs, we will not solve the obesity epidemic.
Yeah, like
So,
you said,
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully what people learn in this workshop is to understand how these things are connected. Obesity is not this separate part here that you deal with in one particular way, but it's one manifestation of a system out of balance. And how do you nudge it back into a resilient, stable state? I think that's
Yeah, thank you. Back to what you had said earlier, the curse of the single fix emphasis and how difficult that can be. Yeah, causes more problems sometimes than it solves. Yeah. Dr. Mayer, are you still teaching at UCLA?
Um, so I reduced my effort to 40%, and I've sort of pulled out of the administrative obligations, but I work with a lot of students and faculty members um, on publications. I give a lot of lectures to academic colleagues. Um, so I've also stopped my practice at UCLA, but have switched it to an online consultation on a small scale. So focusing on these things like that workshop or um, direct to consumer education has sort of become a main goal. I don't need to convince any more of my colleagues what they should be doing. Thank God this has actually been successful in the last 20 years that a lot of them are taking this path. I see this at UCLA. A lot of the junior faculty has been heavily influenced by this. So my main focus is really to do this to a large number of people through education, social media, newsletters, and things like these educational activities like that workshop, which is particularly exciting.
Yeah, Dr. Mayer, even access to you as this, portal of knowledge for, I mean, with 40 years of research would be unheard of, like 20 years ago, I mean, I still remember when I started digging into the Human Microbiome Project, I would spend hours at UCSD looking at all the research, and trying to figure things out. But now it's all at your fingertips, everything is available online. And people today are so fortunate, to have this knowledge. And that's what I'm hoping with this workshop, that Dr. Mayer's immense knowledge, and he's got this facility of sharing things in a way that the layperson can understand, and that's key, right? I've really talked to a lot of people who are scientists, and they're not able to translate the science into lay people's words, and Dr. Mayer is truly best blessed in doing it. He is a teacher, so I'm hoping that people who attend this workshop really you know bring a paper and pencil, take notes, because you're listening to the master of this. I still remember the day I bought that book, The Mind-Gut Connection, and it completely changed how I was even, and at the time I thought, oh my gosh, I know quite a bit about the microbiome, and I thought, I know nothing about it, And so his book taught me so much, and I'm hoping that we continue doing that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this is, just as a side story, so I'm working right now. I've been invited by my publisher, HarperCollins, to write a 10-year anniversary edition of the Mind-Gut Connection. So it's 10 years old now. And doing this, I had to reread the book, and I've sort of been amazed to really how appropriate it still is in most of the key concepts. There's clearly there's additional scientific studies have come up. In general, they have confirmed the original concept, and it's still a very popular book. I mean, has surprised me even more that 10 years later. So most of the time, books get forgotten, and but it is still, in this particular area, is still one of the best-selling books, after 10 years. So I think this gives me a lot of encouragement to pursue that even further, and take that to even more people. I think that, we talked about the bubble early on. So, yeah, this this message has not reached the majority of Americans for sure. It has reached probably a lot of people on the West Coast and on the East Coast. But I think there's big holes in the middle and in the South that people have no awareness of it. And so that's an exciting challenge, that I see.
So you're trying to really multiply your efforts by branching more into consumer education, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
fantastic.
I think that's something that all scientists somehow I feel strongly should be doing. And I think we're doing a much better job of it, where people are showing up on in Instagram and things like that. Because the scientists, I mean, when you listen to Dr. Mayer, for example, he's not saying things like I hear on Instagram, for example, oh, do this, and this is what's going to happen. But someone who's done the research is everything is more nuanced, saying, well, that could be a possibility, and the humility of having spent all of those years after just that one thing makes it more real and makes it something that people should trust rather than a fast fix. I mean, all the time I have companies asking me to promote this supplement and I feel very uncomfortable about it because I don't know who I'm speaking to. If you don't know that person, how are you going to be saying this is the supplement or the fix for you? So it's better to look at it, step away from fixes and look at a systems approach to this.
Well, one of the challenges would be to make sure consumers listened to both of you and not some muscle-bound dude or some skinny lady doing 1,000 push-ups, right? But that's what you're trying to accomplish. So it's hard nowadays, right, to get the noise out of our lives. So I appreciate what you guys are doing. Yeah. Anu, I see you also work with hormone, especially women's hormone issues, and wondering what impact that might have on our discussion of the gut-brain connection.
Yeah, do you mean like women's health and estrogen?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of women come to me with questions about HRT or bioidenticals, and that is not my zone of expertise. And I always refer out to whoever can help them. But I look at it from a physiological perspective. What are some of the changes that are happening when women approach midlife? Estrogen is tanking, progesterone maybe, and things that there's a different system. But we are playing by the old rules and they wonder why it's not working. So they push harder, they try harder. And those are the things that I bring to light for midlifers, And if they want to approach it from adding an HRT or something like that, I guide them to the right person.
I see. Yeah. We recently just
I mean,
discovered that. Sorry.
commenting on the same topic, it's definitely one of the more exciting things. I think you asked me that earlier, or planning to ask me about is what's the most exciting thing going on in the kind of research that I've been involved in. So certainly the role of a subgroup of microbes in processing and recycling hormones, both male testosterone, but also estrogen, and recycling them, basically whatever the liver has pre-processed for excretion can be retroprocessed by the microbes, by certain microbes, and then reabsorbed, getting into the systemic circulation. That's a system that is amenable to fairly easy manipulation through, again, diet, anything that affects the microbes. So you don't need to take external hormones. And so I'm working with a colleague at UCLA who has made this his main area of research. This ability of certain microbes to recycle estrogen and to enhance this with natural, for example, with certain with certain dietary or with certain microbes selected. So not the typical probiotics, but he's working on specialized microbes that could influence this process. So you would increase your natural recycling. And that could potentially give women a tremendous non-medical advantage of not suffering through these symptoms that occur because, estrogen all of a sudden drops to a very low level. And so I think it's interesting that it's taken so long before this has sort of become a main research focus area. I think it points to our intrinsic bias of research that, women's health has not had the same priority as men's health. Um, A, because it's more difficult to study in animal models. B, it's just not been taken as serious, even though, half of the world's population goes through these symptoms. So I'm really excited about this possibility of how this interface between female and male sex hormones, the microbiome and the brain gut microbiome system, to understand this and to base new therapeutic options on this understanding. I think that's a really exciting area.
And not everyone really responds to HRT in the same way. I have had clients who struggle. They just go into, it's like, and the doctors can only do so much. They try different combinations of it, and then they finally say, well, I don't know what's happening. Or if the other way around, if someone is not interested in taking HRT and they have some symptoms, the push is towards HRT, but ultimately it becomes the patient's choice. So, but like Dr. Mayer said, from a diet and lifestyle perspective, there are so many things we can do for the midlifers, rhythm, from a temperature control, from hot flashes and night sweats, how the system can really help them. And fiber is being just kind of pushed to, it's never really a huge part of the conversation. I know that protein is getting a lot of, especially in the social media world. And I just believe that, yes, anchor your protein, but surround with fiber, especially for in midlife. We have enough research supporting the use of fiber as a good mediator for some of these things that show up in midlife. So.
Yeah, literally food for the good guys. Yeah.
Yeah, everything changes, right? Gut, brain, motility, how we approach stress, the belly fat. So if we stop thinking about it from a food first approach, I see a lot of midlifers really responding to these changes.
Yeah. I was not aware of the hormone uh, and microbiome connection. My wife and I recently discovered that I have 10 to 20 times more estrogen than she does, which, tells you a lot. So, can you tell us what microbes are involved in the hormone recycling?
Um, so this basically depends on the presence of a particular enzyme or two enzymes in certain microbes. This has not been studied extensively, and these enzymes they're kind of they're kind of non-specific. They recycle a lot of things, basically good and bad. I mean, the goal ultimately is to enhance the subgroup of microbes that recycle estrogen, or for men that recycle testosterone. And it's an ongoing field. I would say so. These enzymes, beta glucuronidase, is so the one that received the most attention. Um, but there's another one, a group, the sulfatases that has a parallel pathway. Um, so I can't tell you specifically which ones you would want to increase based on the species or the strain level. It's the ones that have the greatest expression of these enzymes. I mean, that's basically what this field is going. And it's certainly these microbes are responsive to dietary fiber. That there's no question on that you will increase the percentage of them. But fiber is not specific. So, 5 years down the line, I foresee, I can't comment on this right now for, um, you know, um, reasons that some of my collaborators are, working on this right now. But I would bet my money on it that in 5 years from now, we will have these like probiotics that selectively enhance these beta-glucuronidase producing microbes and increase the recycling of estrogen. And then, decide you wouldn't give them to everybody. You would test women what their baseline level is. And then, based on that, you would add this probiotic to it. A very exciting field. In the meantime, as Anu said, to increase the fiber amount in your diet, a big variety. It's not just having one. It's not just adding inulin to it. That's now being added to a lot of supplementary products. What we know today is it's the variety. That's sort of up to 80. We know from some studies up to 30 different fruits and vegetables per week are required before some of these beneficial microbes increase in numbers. And that's almost certainly due to the fiber of these 30 microbes and to their polyphenol content. We know less about the role of the polyphenols. All the research is focused on the fiber. But the two things that make plants so healthy is both, the fiber and polyphenols, these molecules that used to be called antioxidants. But once we ingest them, they don't really work like antioxidants. They are food for the microbes, certain groups of microbes that process them. And so I would say until we have these specific tools or scissors available, I think the general recommendation, and it's not so hard to eat 30 different vegetables, fruits and vegetables. Like it seems intimidating, but quite honestly, if you start trying it yourself with salads and morning bowls, it's not that hard to do.
And that's one of the reasons, Rich, that I focused on diet in the book and Flourish from Within, because I felt like I needed to get across this message about a microbiome friendly diet. We always say a Mediterranean diet is really good for most of us, for every aspect of health, right? We already know that. So and Flourish from Within, I just really focused on, okay, you're at a starting point, and your digestion does not allow you to increase different kinds of fibers at this point. And really, it's at this point, right? And so we start with foundational layers. We increase your vegetable and fruit consumption. And most of us are able to, especially if it's cooked. And it all depends on, again, the microbiome test being a starting point. Like, do you have certain patterns of like methane dominance or hydrogen sulfide? And that becomes like a starting point. And of course, in addition to that, we're looking and listening to the client or the patient and their symptoms. If they have a lot of flatulence and things like that, and they're like, oh, I can't do cruciferous vegetables or too much protein. So we go step by step. We start with foundational layers. We increase the enhancers like spices and herbs that are really rich in polyphenols and good fats. And that's another thing that's mind-boggling today. This whole talk about saturated fat. Well, we have the guidelines now. We were told that saturated fat needs to be reduced, but then on the opposite side, we seem to see a push for more of these saturated fat-rich foods. So there's a lot of confusion about nutrition. Nutrition is a pretty young science, and it's pretty complicated. So if anyone says they know everything about nutrition, I would just run away from that person because it's not that easy. It's so bio-individual. And in the book, I just say, let's start step one, foundational layers, enhances, and then let's add some functional foods like beta glucans, resistant starch, these polyphenol-rich foods, and see where you are. How long does it take for your body to stabilize and regulate and accept this tolerance, even in the microbial, in the diet diversity. So that's pretty much how we approach it.
Yeah, I love that. My wife and I, several years ago, aimed at that 30 plants per week. And our most successful days, we hit 30 in a single day. Now that's hard to do, but 30 a week, I agree, is very doable.
It's so easy and doable. Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Mayer, I think you had a thought there.
Yeah, I had a thought there. So, Anu mentioned these new dietary guidelines. So that's a good example of how, I would say political and economic factors have influenced the guidelines. Even though these guidelines are produced by advisory boards that have all the key scientists and experts of the country present, but the final decision is not made by this committee of experts. And it's too bad. Anybody can read between the lines that this is clearly, so I mean, you in Wisconsin, agricultural industry is an important factor, but you can definitely read between the lines. This is heavily influenced by, economic lobbying interests in favor of the, agricultural industry. And so our messaging is neither influenced by selling something to people or to nudging them into any sort of, political or philosophical pattern. It's really evidence-based, what we know today. And, with evidence, yeah, I mean, the more we learn, the more this evidence will change over time. If we did that workshop in 10 years from now, it would maybe different. The messaging may be different, but yeah, both of us are strong believers. This should not be influenced by, um, commercial interests, either individual or lobbying interests, or should really be based on what we know today and um, what we can, without any reservation, recommend to people.
And I think stepping away from this obsession with single nutrients, seed oil, beef tallow, you know, we're, we're really missing out on the big picture, right? Micronutrients. Body doesn't make it. We need to get it from our diet. So why not just focus on general guidelines for food rather than just make it so complicated that the layperson saying, I'm not even going to listen to the science because the science is going to change because they think this is the science. So we're hoping with our workshop, we just keep it very clear and evidence-based and really not focus on single nutrients and immediate fixes to help. And that's what people are looking for. They are looking for a quick fix. If you're choosing a drug, and I mean, I have many clients on Ozempic, and I have nothing against someone taking a drug if it really helps them. But I'm saying that along with that, if you're not looking at the big picture, that diet and lifestyle is indeed our responsibility, and then we're missing a point here because most of the time in our lives, I think we kind of just navigate life at like a neutral, neither too sick nor too healthy. We just kind of say, oh, I get headaches or I'm always gassy, not a big deal. Uh, but then when we are bombarded by a disease or like cancer or like a cardiovascular issue, and we go to the other side and we have to see a doctor, and the doctor or the medical system either can help us and bring us back to that neutral place, or they may fail, right? But if we come back to that neutral place, really going from that neutral place to optimal wellness, I think is our responsibility. It is not the doctor's responsibility. So we have to empower ourselves with education, the right kind of science, and take ourselves to that because we are unique. Our body is unique, our system is unique, and what works for you is not going to work for me. So listening to people talk about supplements or this is the best food, I don't think in the long run it works. It has to work for your body. All we can offer is this is evidence-based. This is what we know so far, and we have incredible um, studies done on fiber, on certain kinds of polyphenols, extra virgin olive oil, things like that. So let's start with basics, and let's not get bogged down by all of these, very simplistic sort of messages that is not going to work for us long run. I mean, that's my take on that.
I can't remember his name offhand, a reputable doctor, in social media. He says the only purpose for food is to get more olive oil into you. So to your point, yeah. So
Well,
you're reaching the masses with this optimal health message, but is it, and I know you just said Anu, it's not from the doctors, it needs to come from us and to own that. But is this message being
well, I mean, Rich, what I mean is that we have a system that's actually failing us, right? How much time does a doctor have with you? 7 minutes is the average visit with a general practitioner. You cannot expect that doctor to be talking to you about microbiome health. He's probably not even caught up with the new research. So it's not the fault of the doctor, it's the fault of the system that we live in. And that whole thing of connecting the dots does not exist in our system. The cardiologist is saying one thing, the family medicine guy is saying something else. There's no team approach to that. So the only thing we can do as consumers is really empower our knowledge about what's out there.
But what if that message hit the medical schools such that even in those 7 minutes, they're talking about these foundational things? Do you see that as even a remote possibility in the near future?
Yeah, it is hitting the medical schools. I mean,
Yeah.
so for example, UCNA has a center for digestive wellness now. It sort of we we pioneered this like some 30 years ago, and now it's grown to multiple dietitians and multiple psychologists, um, and it's very popular. Um, it had to be subsidized in the beginning, so this was not profitable. But in the meantime, as LA is a good place,
Mhm.
philanthropists have jumped in and have supported this in a major way. Other institutions are doing the same thing. So I see this another evolution has been happening in medicine that a lot of conventionally trained physicians then do a functional medicine specialty training on top of it. So I've met a lot of them, to my big surprise. And that's a response that these physicians feel they didn't get the tools in medical school to provide this holistic care. Um, the downside of that is, because they no longer have the income stream from procedures and I mean, mainly from procedures, they have shifted it towards selling supplements. Like every one of those practitioners on their website, on the second page, you have the store for all the supplements, and so that's the one. But it's clearly changing the medical system. I think what I see happening is just basically this on gastroenterology, my own specialty. The physicians that want to get trained in that and want to make a living are the ones that want to do endoscopies, primarily procedures. So it becomes a very technical specialty. Whereas people that have the more holistic viewpoint will no longer go into that specialty, but will um, either go choose functional medicine or um, join groups. I mean, there's these growing groups, and I mean, UC Irvine, for example, also has a big philanthropic component that they have introduced this big integrative medicine program. I see this happening across the country, maybe right now more in California, maybe in New York, but I think this will be a trend in general.
Well, I do hope so because right now I see that it's an elitist axis or geographical axis. The two coasts, yes, definitely people who can go looking for a functional doctor, medicine, yes. But if let's say you have a plain old HMO and you're in Central California or in Arkansas, that's
Yeah,
not
you don't
happening.
have it. Yeah.
Mm.
So I think for people like that, the universal message should be let's start with food and things that we can access. Right now there is an opportunity for people to buy because I work with clients in Central California or in other parts in the South, for example. I work with a lot of people of color with different diversities. And the one thing I've noticed that is there's more access to foods that are deemed healthy at Walmart, Target, things that wasn't the case at some, at one point. So that's good news. So I can tell someone to go shop at Walmart and get these more healthy foods as a good starting point. So they don't feel left out of the conversation or they feel like, how do I do this, rather than growing a food.
That's a lot of positive changes and hope for the future. So I appreciate that message very much. You have both given a lot of your time today. I want to be respectful of that time. So just want to know if there's anything else at all you want to say, anything more about the workshop, anything.
I would say, people that are listening to this, I would encourage them to take advantage of certainly starting with the webinar, which will give them a fairly good introduction of what we are planning to do and what they can expect from this workshop. And also, if it's important to them enough, their health, their longevity, their well-being, to really go through this 3 months workshop, which is a unique opportunity. There's nothing else available that's comparable right now. And yeah, I would encourage people to take advantage of it.
Anu, anything to add?
Well, no, I think he said it perfectly. Learning from the expert in the brain gut field is such a great opportunity. And like every day when I speak to Dr. Mayer, I learned something new, something that maybe my brain hasn't quite picked up yet. And I'm like, that is what I need to focus on, with this client or that client. And he doesn't even know that he's doing it. He's just giving us information. So imagine this kind of knowledge available in your living room through every week. You're learning from an expert. I think that's fabulous, and any small part that I can do to help a client get that message, I'm thrilled to do that.
Wonderful. And I
And
just, hmm?
I would like to thank you, Rich, for giving us the opportunity to
Yes.
talk about this topic. I mean, this is really great. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. And I learned something new. I thought this was a one and done webinar, but you're introducing several months worth. Way better. Now I'm all the more excited. So
Okay.
fantastic.
Thank you
Well,
so much, Rich, and thank you for
thank you. All right. Take care. All
Thanks.
right.
Bye-bye.
Yep.